The Mafia boss humiliated the fat waitress in front of his entire family. Then his father stood up, looked at her, and said, "This woman saved my life 6 years ago." Some secrets are not kept out of cowardice. They are kept because the person holding them understands something most people never will. That timing is everything. That revenge, real revenge, the kind that draws blood and changes lives, does not belong to the person who strikes first. It belongs to the one who waits. Rosa Ferrante had been waiting for 6 years. She stood in the service corridor of Ristorante Cavaliere, pressing her back against the cool tile wall, listening to the noise of the private dining room swell like a coming storm. Crystal clinked against crystal. Men laughed with the particular loudness of people who have never been told to quiet down. A string quartet played Vivaldi in the corner, its delicate notes swallowed whole by the thunderous self-importance of the Esposito family. Tonight, the Espositos were celebrating. Rosa smoothed the front of her black apron with both hands. The apron was standard issue, designed for a much smaller frame, and it pulled tight across her wide hips, the strings straining at the back. She was a heavy woman, 31 years old, standing 5 feet 4 inches in sensible black shoes that had long ago stopped cushioning her feet against the punishing marble floors. Her dark hair was swept into a neat bun. Her face was plain, composed, and entirely unremarkable to the people who looked at her. That was the thing about Rosa. People never truly looked at her. They looked through her, the way the wealthy look through a window, seeing only the view on the other side and never the glass itself. She had learned to use that invisibility like a second skin. Marco, the head waiter, appeared at the end of the corridor. He was a thin, nervous man who perpetually smelled of cigarette smoke and anxiety. "Rosa." He gestured sharply toward the private dining room. "Table 7, the Esposito party. They want the antipasti course cleared and the primo brought out. Move quickly and stay quiet. Tonight is not a night for mistakes." "I understand," Rosa said calmly. Marco hesitated, studying her face as though searching for some evidence of incompetence. He found none. He never did. "The gentleman at the head of the table is Carmelo Esposito," Marco said, lowering his voice to barely above a whisper. "You know what that name means." "Yes," Rosa said. "I know exactly what it means." Marco stared at her a moment longer, then turned and disappeared back toward the kitchen. Rosa did not move immediately. She pressed her fingertips against the cool wall and took one long, measured breath. Through the frosted glass panel beside the corridor door, she could see the blurred shapes of the dinner party. There were perhaps 20 people around the long table, draped in the kind of silk and tailored wool that announced wealth without needing to speak it aloud. She could not yet see him clearly, but she knew he was there. She picked up her tray, squared her shoulders, and pushed through the door. The private dining room of Ristorante Cavaliere was one of the most beautiful spaces in all of Naples, New York. The restaurant itself sat in the heart of the financial district, its exterior a discreet limestone facade that gave nothing away. Inside, the private room was lined with hand-painted frescoes imported from a convent in the Campagna region. Candelabras threw warm, trembling light across the table. The smell of saffron and braised short rib hung in the air like perfume. At the head of the table sat Carmelo Esposito. He was 36 years old, the undisputed patriarch of the Esposito syndicate since taking the seat from his ailing father 4 years prior. Carmelo was the kind of handsome that came with danger built directly into it. Dark eyes set beneath heavy brows, a jaw carved with contemptuous precision, broad shoulders filling a charcoal Zegna suit that had been made for him and no one else. He wore no jewelry except for a single platinum watch that cost more than Rosa earned in a decade. He was surrounded by the architecture of his power. To his left sat his mother, Philomena, a silver-haired woman of 70 whose posture was so rigidly perfect it looked like a personal insult to everyone who slouched. To his right sat his bride-to-be, Valentina Greco, a woman of spectacular, aggressive beauty who wore her wealth the way a peacock wears its feathers, visibly, deliberately, as a constant performance. Down the length of the table sat Carmelo's two brothers, Marco and Dante, cousins, underbosses, capos. Their wives, polished and silent, lawyers in tailored suits, a city councilman who smiled too often, and at the far end, in the last chair placed there as though an afterthought, sat an old man. Rosa noticed him the moment she stepped through the door. She had not allowed herself to think about him in years. She had trained herself not to. But the body has its own memory, separate from the mind, and hers recognized him instantly. A cold current moved through her chest, quick and electric, and then she locked it away beneath the surface of her professional composure. She approached the table from the left, lifting the emptied antipasti plates with practiced efficiency. The conversation flowed around her without interruption. She was furniture. She was the wallpaper. She was the mechanism by which the food appeared and disappeared, nothing more. She had reached the midpoint of the table, her tray loaded with cleared plates, when Valentina leaned toward Carmelo and murmured something at the corner of her painted lips, her dark eyes sliding sideways to Rosa. Carmelo glanced up. His gaze moved across Rosa with the kind of casual contempt that does not even register itself as cruelty because it requires so little effort. Then he spoke. He spoke in Neapolitan dialect, the precise, compressed vernacular of the old neighborhood, the language of the Esposito family, and no one outside it. He leaned back in his chair, lifted his wineglass in Rosa's direction with a lazy tilt of his wrist, and said with the unhurried confidence of a man who has never been corrected in his life, "Look at this one. Built like a delivery truck and moving just as slow. I hope the kitchen moves faster than she does, or we will all die of old age before the pasta arrives." Valentina laughed, a bright, crystalline sound that cut through the room. His brother Marco grinned. Dante raised his eyebrows with an expression of amused pity. The cousins smirked into their wineglasses. The lawyer cleared his throat and looked at the ceiling. The councilman chuckled softly, not sure why, but unwilling to be the one who did not. Rosa continued loading plates onto her tray. Her hands were steady, her face was still. Her eyes remained on the table surface. The room settled back into its various conversations, and then the chair at the far end of the table made a sound. It was a quiet sound, a scrape of wood against marble, deliberate and unhurried. The kind of sound that, in a room full of men who understood power, carried the specific weight of a decision being made. Everyone at the table registered it before they turned to look. The conversations did not stop all at once. They tapered, one by one, like candles being pinched out, until the room was entirely, absolutely silent. Giuseppe Esposito was standing. He was 72 years old. He had not attended a family gathering in 6 years. He had not appeared publicly in any capacity in 6 years. The official explanation, the one the family maintained carefully, was that he had retired to the estate in Lake Como to recover from the injuries sustained in the car accident that had nearly killed him. The unofficial understanding, whispered between the capos and never spoken directly, was that Giuseppe had emerged from that accident as a different man, slower, quieter, diminished. He did not look diminished now. He stood at the end of the table with the particular stillness of a man who has spent a long time measuring moments. His hair was entirely white. His suit was older than anyone else's at the table, but worn with an authority that made the newer garments around him look like costumes. His hands rested at his sides, not clasped, not trembling. His eyes were fixed on Rosa. Carmelo's smile faded. He set his wineglass down with a careful, controlled motion and looked from his father to the waitress and back again, his expression shifting through confusion, through irritation, and into something resembling unease. "Papa," Carmelo said, his voice carrying the particular precision of a man choosing his words in real time. "Sit down. You should rest. We were just—" "I heard what you were just doing," Giuseppe said. His voice had not lost its depth. It filled the room without effort, the way voices do when they belong to people who have never had to raise them to be obeyed. He walked the length of the table. He did not look at Carmelo as he passed him. He did not look at Valentina or Marco or Dante or any of the others who tracked his progress with a silence so complete it felt physical. He stopped beside Rosa. Rosa had not moved. She stood with her loaded tray, her hands still, her breathing even and controlled. 6 years of waiting, and it had arrived not the way she imagined it, not as a confrontation she had engineered, but simply, quietly, by walking through a door and doing her job. Giuseppe looked at her for a long moment. "You are working here," he said. It was not a question. It carried the weight of someone encountering something unexpected and significant. "Yes," Rosa said. "I have been for 5 years. Are you well?" "I am well, thank you." Carmelo's chair scraped back. "Papa, what is this? You know this woman? She is a waitress. Come back to the table. There are people here who—" "Sit down, Carmelo." The softness of Giuseppe's voice made the command more devastating, not less. Carmelo sat. Giuseppe reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and produced nothing. He simply straightened and turned to face his family. And when he spoke, his voice was absolutely level. "This woman," he said, "saved my life." The silence in the room changed quality. It became denser. Valentina's painted smile held its position, but lost its warmth. Marco and Dante exchanged a look so fast it was almost imperceptible. The councilman put down his fork. 6 years ago, Giuseppe continued, the night of the accident on Route 9, I was in that car for 11 minutes before anyone reached me. The fuel line had ruptured. The car was going to burn. My seatbelt had jammed. I could not move. He paused, not for effect, but because the memory required space. She was the first paramedic on the scene. She arrived before the fire department. She arrived before my security, who were 4 minutes behind me, because I had taken a different route without telling them. He looked at Rosa as he said this last part. She pulled me from the vehicle with her own hands. I weighed, at the time, significantly more than I do now, and the door was partially crushed. She used a rescue tool she carried in her own kit, not the vehicle's kit, her own, because she had learned that the department's tools were sometimes left uncharged. She had prepared for a situation she hoped would never happen. She had dragged me 30 feet from the car before it caught fire. The silence was absolute. My blood type, Giuseppe said, is AB negative. It is rare. The hospital in the next county did not have the supply required for the transfusions I needed. She sat in that hallway for 4 hours and gave 3 units of her own blood. Her blood type matched. She had checked my medical bracelet in the field. He turned briefly toward Carmelo. 4 hours, while you were being driven from Manhattan. She sat in a plastic chair in a hospital corridor and gave her blood to a man she did not know, because it was the right thing to do. Carmelo's face had gone very still. I asked her afterward to keep quiet about her involvement, Giuseppe said. There were reasons for that, which I will come to. I arranged for her to leave her position at the ambulance service and find work here, where I could ensure she was safe and employed and not connected in any public record to the events of that night. He paused again. I owe her a debt that I have not adequately honored, and I will not sit at a table and watch my son mock her in a language he assumed she could not understand. Carmelo said nothing. The room said nothing. Rosa stood very still with her tray of cleared plates, looking at the old man who had asked her 6 years ago for the one thing she had never fully understood until this moment. Wait. Just wait. "Papa," Carmelo said finally, his voice stripped of its earlier authority, scraped down to something quieter and more complicated. "Why did you ask her to keep quiet? What reasons?" Giuseppe looked at his eldest son for a long moment. "Because the accident was not an accident," he said. The room's silence shifted into something that felt like a held breath. If this story is already reaching inside your chest, you are not alone. Stories like this one, about the people the powerful overlook and the truths that survive in silence, are what this channel is built on. Subscribe right now and hit the notification bell so you are here for every single chapter. What Rosa does next will change everything. Giuseppe moved to the chair that had been occupied by the councilman, who instinctively slid sideways to make room without being asked. The old man sat with the careful economy of movement that belongs to people who have learned not to waste anything. Carmelo was watching him with the fixed attention of a man who has realized, mid-sentence, that the conversation he thought he was having is not the conversation that is actually happening. "You told us it was ice," Marco said, leaning forward. His voice had lost its earlier casual ease. "Black ice. A blown tire. You said the investigation found nothing." "The investigation found what I told them to find," Giuseppe said. The statement fell into the room like a stone into water. The ripples moved outward in every direction. "You covered it up yourself," Dante said slowly, his brow creasing. "Why would you cover it up if you knew someone had?" "Because I did not yet know who had done it," Giuseppe said. "And in our world, when you do not know who your enemy is, the most dangerous thing you can do is let them know you are looking." He folded his hands on the table. "I needed time, and I needed them to believe they had succeeded in diminishing me, that I had come home broken, that I was no longer a threat." Carmelo's jaw tightened. 6 years, Papa. You let us believe for 6 years. "I let you believe what you needed to believe to behave naturally," Giuseppe said, without apology. "If you had known, you would have acted. And if you had acted before I had the full picture, you would have struck the wrong target and started a war that would have destroyed this family." "Then who?" Carmelo asked. The word came out flat and hard. Giuseppe did not answer immediately. He reached again into his jacket pocket, and this time produced a phone. He placed it on the table in front of him and slid it slowly toward the center, within reach of Carmelo. "Play it," he said. Carmelo looked at the phone. He looked at his father. He picked it up. The recording was 47 seconds long. It had been made in a parking garage in Lower Manhattan on a Wednesday evening in November, 6 years ago, 3 days before the accident on Route 9. The audio quality was not perfect. The environment was concrete, and there was ambient traffic noise beneath the voices. But the voices themselves were clear enough. The first voice belonged to a man named Arturo Esposito, Carmelo's cousin, Filomena's nephew, the man who had been seated 2 chairs down from Valentina all evening, who had smiled at Giuseppe's entrance and said nothing during the entire speech,
whose expression Carmelo now realized he had not once looked at. The second voice on the recording was a hired contractor whose name was not relevant because his role in the family had ended 6 weeks after the accident, quietly and permanently, for reasons that had, at the time, been described as a business dispute. On the recording, Arturo was giving very specific instructions about a route, about a time, about a fuel line, about making it look like weather. The recording ended. Carmelo set the phone down on the table. He did not look at Arturo. He looked at the phone. This was the way Carmelo Esposito handled moments that required absolute precision. He went very still. He went very quiet. He allowed everything he was feeling to move through him and settle into something cold and usable before he permitted himself to respond in any direction. His father had taught him this. He had forgotten until this moment that his father had taught him almost everything he knew. Arturo was speaking. He was speaking quickly, in the register of a man whose careful construction of a lie is collapsing in real time and who is attempting to shore it up with more words. "Uncle, that recording is out of context. I was relaying a conversation I had overheard. I was trying to warn someone, I was." "Arturo," Giuseppe said. The single word stopped the younger man completely.
"I have known since 8 weeks after the accident," Giuseppe said. "The contractor spoke before he was removed. He was very thorough in what he shared. I have had 6 years to decide what to do with that information." He glanced around the table. "I chose tonight because Carmelo needed to understand something before he takes a wife and begins the next chapter of this family's history. He needed to understand that the person who sits at the head of this table is never the safest person in the room. The most dangerous person in any room is the one nobody is watching." He looked at Rosa. Rosa had set her tray down on the service station at some point during the recording. She was not sure exactly when. She stood with her hands folded in front of her apron, and she looked at the old man who had asked her 6 years ago to wait and had never told her what she was waiting for. She understood now. He had needed a witness, someone outside the family, someone with no stake in any of the alliances and the inherited loyalties and the years of complicated history. Someone who held the recording not because they had been assigned to hold it, but because they had chosen to. Someone who could not be pressured or bought because they had already been given everything they needed and had asked for nothing. Someone invisible. Carmelo turned to her. For the first time since she had entered the dining room, he actually looked at her. Not through her. At her. The contempt from earlier was entirely absent from his face. What had replaced it was harder to name. It was the expression of a man who has just learned that the geometry of the world he thought he understood is different from what he assumed. "You knew," he said. "You have been here 5 years. You knew what was on that recording." "Yes," Rosa said. "And you waited." "Yes." "Why?" He asked it without accusation. He asked it the way a man asks a question when he genuinely does not have the answer and has realized that not having it matters. Rosa thought for a moment before she answered. "Because your father asked me to," she said. "And because a man who asks a stranger to keep a secret rather than use it, who pays a debt in kindness rather than in money, who chooses patience over violence when violence would have been easier, is a man whose judgment I trusted more than my own." The room was utterly silent. Filomena, at her end of the table, was looking at Rosa with an expression that contained something the old woman rarely showed anyone. It was recognition. The acknowledgement of one person by another who understands what it costs to carry something alone.
Valentina had set down her wine glass. At the far end of the table, two of Carmelo's men had moved quietly to positions on either side of Arturo's chair. Arturo was no longer speaking. He was looking at the table in front of him with the fixed stare of a man cataloging his limited options and finding none of them acceptable. Carmelo stood. He picked up his wine glass from the table, and he walked the length of the room to where Rosa stood at the service station. He stopped in front of her. He was a full head taller than she was, broad-shouldered and impeccably dressed, and he stood with the physical ease of a man accustomed to occupying space without apology. For a moment he said nothing. Then he raised his wine glass. "I owe you an apology," he said. "You do not owe me anything," Rosa said quietly. "Your father settled that account." "My father settled his account," Carmelo said. "He does not speak for mine." He did not look away from her face. "What I said at this table tonight was beneath me. It was beneath this family. I said it in a language I assumed you could not understand, which means I was not even willing to own it. That is the act of a coward, not a man." Rosa looked at him steadily. "I accept your apology," she said. He held her gaze for another moment. Then he nodded once, with the particular gravity of a man completing a transaction he will not revisit. He turned to face the table. "Arturo," he said, "stand up." Arturo stood. He had the look of a man who has known for some time that a particular moment was coming, and has never quite managed to convince himself that it would not. "You will come with Marco and Stefano now," Carmelo said. "We will speak privately. Whatever happens after that conversation is a matter for the family to decide properly. But it will be decided. Tonight." Arturo did not argue. There was nothing left to argue. The recording existed. The contractor's testimony had existed for 6 years, preserved in a form that the old man in the corner had managed with the patience of someone who understood that some accounts must be settled at exactly the right moment, and not a day before. Marco and Stefano moved him toward the side door. The room breathed again, cautiously, the way a room does when a storm has passed through and the damage is still being assessed. Giuseppe rose from his chair. He crossed the room to where Rosa stood. He stopped in front of her, and with the unhurried dignity of a man who does not perform gestures, he inclined his head toward her. A bow, small, private, entirely genuine. "I told you I would ask you to wait," he said. "I did not tell you how long. That was not fair." "It was fair enough," Rosa said. "Are you satisfied with how this evening has resolved?" Rosa considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I came to work tonight to do my job," she said. "I did my job. Everything else that happened was yours. I am satisfied." The old man studied her face for a moment longer. Then the corner of his mouth moved, barely, in the direction of something that might, in a different context, be called a smile. "You are an extraordinary woman," he said. "You always were." Rosa picked up her tray from the service station. "I still have a primo course to bring out," she said. "The kitchen has been holding it." Giuseppe laughed. It was a quiet sound, rough with disuse, but real. He stepped aside. Rosa walked back through the door of the private dining room, into the service corridor, past Marco, who was pressing himself against the wall with his mouth slightly open and his notepad forgotten entirely in his hand, past the line cooks who looked up from their stations with expressions of bewildered curiosity, past the expediter calling times for tables she was not responsible for tonight. She set the empty tray on the rack by the pass. She picked up the first plate of primo. Hand-rolled pasta, braised rabbit, a scattering of herbs from the garden behind the restaurant, a reduction that had taken the chef 3 days to develop. She carried it back toward the private dining room. Behind her, through the swing of the kitchen door, She could hear the sounds of the party resuming. Glass against glass, the tentative restart of conversation. The quartet beginning again, a different movement now, slower and more deliberate, as though even the musicians understood that the room they were playing for was not quite the same room it had been an hour ago. Rosa had spent 6 years being invisible in this corridor. She walked it now exactly as she always had, steady, quiet, unhurried. She was not the queen of anything. She was not a hero of any story she had told herself. She was a woman who had pulled a stranger from a burning car because the car was burning and the stranger was inside it. She was a woman who had given her blood because his type matched hers and the hospital did not have enough. She was a woman who had kept a secret because a man with good judgment had asked her to, and she had trusted that judgment, and it had proven sound. She pushed through the door.
The private dining room opened before her, candlelight and frescoes and the complicated layered aftermath of a truth that had finally been allowed to surface. Carmelo Esposito was at the head of the table. He saw her come through the door. He did not look through her. He looked at her, and he did not look away until she had set down the first plate, and then the second, and then moved quietly around the table, continuing her work, because the evening was not yet over, and there were still people at this table who needed to be fed. Some secrets are not kept out of cowardice. They are kept because the person holding them understands something most people never will, that timing is everything. Rosa Ferrante had known this for 6 years, and she had been right. This story is over, but the feeling it left behind does not have to be. If you want more stories about the people the world overlooks, the ones who hold the truth quietly until the exact right moment, subscribe to this channel right now. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a single story. And tell us in the comments, did you see the ending coming, or did it catch you completely off guard? Stories like this one are waiting for you. Do not miss them.